And again, my opinion sets the stage for the development, the character development of Priscilla. I mean, what has been everyone's biggest critique of Priscilla over the years? That she's not honest, that she keeps secrets, that she's not forthcoming. There's so many accounts and narratives and interviews out there that punch holes in everything that she's said about her and Elvis over the years that people are like, why? Well, we can see why, can't we? We can see where she came from. We can see why keeping the status quo and prioritizing secrets is more important than love and truthful acceptance and honesty. It just boggles the mind. I know, I'm going on. And the way that she was taught how to deal with her true paternity, keeping that a secret, was then the way that Priscilla then learned to deal with managing the whole Elvis and Priscilla narrative. I personally think that if that hadn't been ingrained in her so hard for the first 15, 16 years of her life, being quiet, containing your emotions, keeping secrets, that it probably then wouldn't have manifested into this personality, this persona that she now inhabits. It's just a tragedy all around, in my opinion. She always looked at it this way. She said in the 1970s, it's the way God wanted it to be. You guys, I feel like I'm gonna cry. This is so sad. At least she had the photographs of Priscilla looking so like Jim, and she knew her granddaughter was alive and well and dating Elvis Presley. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I am Jennifer. So happy to have you back for another Child Bride episode. Today we're going to be on chapter 16 of Child Bride, The Untold Story of Priscilla Beaulieu Presley by Suzanne Finstead. This book is heavy, and today we are on chapter 16 called Family Skeletons. Now in the last chapter, chapter 15, To Timing Elvis, I go into great detail regarding the beginnings of Priscilla's life in Germany after Elvis left. Was Priscilla the despondent, anxious, alone teenager who was just pining for Elvis? Or was she a little bit of a wild child? Did she have a little bit of a past that she never revealed to us? The author goes into all of it, you guys. Conversations and interviews with classmates who knew Priscilla at the time, who are alleging that she was not all alone pining in her bedroom for Elvis Presley. She was indeed out and participating in life and dating several boys her own age at the time. I also go into the paternity story regarding Priscilla. That is an issue that has come up again and again in the last 15 episodes for good reason. So if you want to know and dive a little bit deeper into the true story of Priscilla's real father, who tragically died in a plane crash when she was only 6 months old. His name was James Wagner. Priscilla was a Wagner before she was a Beaulieu. So if you want to know that story, I would encourage you to go all the way back to the beginning. This is a good playlist, you guys. So, you can put it on like a podcast and listen to it and go about your business, but you'll get caught up. It's a great story. Priscilla is a fascinating character study. I'm telling you, I say that all the time because it's true, because it is 100% true. And, there's a lot to dig into where Priscilla is concerned, but we need to get into chapter 16, Family Skeletons. So I've got my Kindle here on a little stand, all geared up and ready to go. I'm telling you, that book is heavy. It's easier to read it on Kindle. I've also got all my chapter notes, all 13 pages. Let's get into this episode, you guys. And when you think about it, it seems somewhat innocuous, okay? A 14-year-old, 15-year-old girl dating and hanging around with boys her own age. Big deal, right? Who cares? But the reason why it's a big deal is because all Priscilla has told us for going on 5 decades is that when Elvis left Germany, there was absolutely no one for her but him, that she was longing for him, that she was pining for him, that she was acting out. Her parents were worried about her. It was all about Elvis. And in the last episode, we see from so many people who were close to her during that time in Germany that the author dug up and interviewed that this was not the case, you guys. Not the case. So chapter 16 opens up with Catherine Wagner, who is Priscilla's maternal grandmother. And much like the way the last chapter began, she is pining herself. She is longing for any news of where her granddaughter went. Now, Catherine Wagner is Priscilla's paternal grandmother. Her son, James Wagner, or Jimmy as he was called, is Priscilla's real father. He died in a plane crash when she was 6 months old. And she was in Priscilla's life, Catherine, up until the time when Priscilla was around 3 years old. At that time, Anne Beaulieu, who's Priscilla's mother, married Paul Beaulieu, and all ties with Anne and Priscilla were tragically severed. Anne never rekindled any type of communication about their whereabouts. She never updated Catherine about anything having to do with her granddaughter. Catherine had her doubts over the years as to why that was, because obviously she knew that her daughter-in-law Anne did get remarried, but all communication came to a screeching halt after that. And the author has told us over and over again about Paul Beaulieu's fragile ego, the atmosphere of fear that was in the Beaulieu house, especially Anne and Priscilla's fear. Apparently it seemed like they were living in fear of Paul Beaulieu, and that is what this chapter is going to detail. So getting back to Catherine, Catherine had seen a Life magazine pictorial of Elvis and Priscilla on the day that Elvis left Germany, and there were pictures made of Priscilla in life, and she was being characterized as the girl that Elvis left behind in Germany. Catherine was ecstatic. She recognized the last name. She put two and two together and thought, could this be my Priscilla, my long lost granddaughter? So at the beginning of the last chapter, she had enlisted her other son, Gene Wagner, who fortuitously was a principal for American Army kids in Munich, Germany. So he was in Germany. The Beaulieus were in Wiesbaden, Germany. Now, Munich is about 3.5 hours away, but she gets in contact with Gene, sends him clippings from the Life magazine article, begs him, can you please see, go to Wiesbaden, try to get in touch with these Beaulieus, see if this Priscilla is my Priscilla. So that is what Gene did. And in this chapter, we read about the very uncomfortable account of how Gene attempted to reconnect with Priscilla and Anne Beaulieu, and just how uncomfortable it was, and how Gene Wagner, Priscilla's real father's brother, left the whole encounter with Anne and Priscilla just kind of feeling hollow and just kind of feeling just empty, just as it pertains to, what he experienced in the Beaulieu home when he was there. So the author tells us that Gene himself was shy and hesitant about contacting Anne Beaulieu to see if this was the Anne that he knew, the then Anne Wagner, and, worried and wondering himself, but he did it because his mother was so desperate and wanted to find out if this Priscilla was her granddaughter. And he told the author that he was worried. He didn't want to embarrass himself. He didn't want to embarrass Anne. He didn't even know if Priscilla knew that her birth father had a brother. He didn't want to have it be embarrassing for her. There was just so many thoughts and emotions swirling around in Gene's head about this whole thing. And he's not even sure about how much Anne told Priscilla about the Wagner family over the years. And so it's just this weird situation all around. And it's at this point in the timeline where Priscilla's telling the author that, I guess in conversations that she had with her mother, that this was the first that she had even heard that her father had a brother and that she had a living grandmother. And I'm thinking, well, that's a little weird. And we'll get into that as the episode goes on. So Gene Wagner says that he gets to Wiesbaden, checks into a hotel, looks up the Beaulieus, and gets a hold of Anne. And he finds out that, yes, this is his sister-in-law, or his former sister-in-law, who he knew as Anne Wagner. And yes, this is the right house. And he says that Anne seemed very, very pleasant, invited him to come on over to the house and meet with her and Priscilla. And it actually was a very lucky time for all of them, because at that time, at the date of when he first made contact with Anne and she invited him over, Paul Beaulieu was out of town. So he was not at the house. So Priscilla tells the author around this time about meeting Gene. She says, I was very contained. There was only so much I felt comfortable with because I knew my mother was uncomfortable. So I didn't really ask a lot of questions. I didn't really go into anything. I mean, he was a stranger to me. So she's talking about the visit that she had when Gene arrived at the house. So Gene gets to the house and he says that they had a really nice visit, him and Anne, and Priscilla was there, but she was kind of like a silent observer. as she's been in pretty much her entire life up to this point. And even Anne had a nice visit that they were talking about Jimmy and the old days, and Anne was just laughing and having a good time and even bringing up old stories that even Gene himself had forgotten about, surrounding the time immediately after when Jimmy had passed, and Anne and Priscilla, when Priscilla was still a baby, moved in with the Wagners for a period of a few months because everyone was so grief-stricken that they all just kind of trauma bonded together in the house because, Anne was a mother of a 6-month-old. Her husband had just been killed in a plane crash, so she goes to live with her in-laws, and Anne and Jean are reminiscing about that time. Jean also tells Suzanne, the author, that during that visit, Anne brought up a very sanitized version of the relationship between Elvis and Priscilla to Jean, basically characterizing it as something that the media had just been blowing all out of proportion. And she kept reiterating to Jean that everything was on the up and up, despite what may have been written about it, that, she's not out late at night with him. None of that is true. It's basically this special friendship, I guess you can say, that's just been elevated to something in the press that it really wasn't. We all know that that's entirely not the case. We do know from the book that Priscilla did spend quite a bit of time with Elvis over at his home off base in Bad Nauheim, and it was a regular occurrence for her to come home after midnight, after 1 a.m. And in one story, Suni, the babysitter, had related to Suzanne, the author, that they had come home, Anne and Paul Beaulieu, 3 sheets to the wind. And at that time, like 1:30 in the morning, Priscilla wasn't even home yet. So this is all very interesting. It just seems like Anne, at every opportunity, is not hesitant at all to portray the relationship between her daughter and Elvis as being strictly platonic. Now, we all know that that can't be true. Of course, they had a spark of romance between them. Priscilla considered Elvis her boyfriend when she would go spend time with him. I have to keep it real here. I mean, even by Priscilla's own characterization of her relationship with Elvis in her first book, that she was deeply in love with him, that they had a romantic connection. The night before that Elvis was set to fly back to the States in March of 1960, she writes in Elvis and Me that she was begging Elvis to consummate their relationship. So, I'm sure with how close Anne and Priscilla was, I'm sure that Anne had bought herself a clue, and she did have a pretty good indication of what was going on with Elvis and Priscilla. But like we've learned in previous episodes, Catherine Wagner started her relationship with James Wagner, Priscilla's real father, in much the same way. She was a teenage girl in high school, sneaking out of the house in her mother's high heels to go meet this early 20-something young man at these military dances. So, I'm sure that she had a lot of sympathy for Priscilla and allowed her to do a lot of things that, if she really, really sat down and thought about it, probably wouldn't have been the best choice to allow her 14-year-old daughter to participate in and do. But, here we are. We all know what happened. She met Elvis, eventually ended up marrying him. So at this point in the chapter, Jean Wagner is relaying to the author that the exchange and the little meet and greet that he had the first one with Priscilla and Anne went so swimmingly that he decided to get a hotel in Wiesbaden for the week with the intention of going back, possibly meeting with his niece Priscilla, getting to know her a little bit better. He went back, made all those arrangements, and unfortunately, this scenario, this idea that he had of maybe getting closer to Anne and getting to know Priscilla a little bit better was not meant to be, because when he returned to the Beaulieu house the next time, everything kind of fell apart because Paul Beaulieu came home, and Jean relays to the author that you could just literally cut the tension with a knife in that house. The entire atmosphere changed. And he said as soon as he walked in for that second visit, Anne Beaulieu pulled him aside and basically, whispering and entreating him, can you please not say anything about who you really are, especially in front of my other children. They do not know anything about the true story about Priscilla's paternity, and we want to protect them. So essentially, he had to lie to Priscilla's 2 half-brothers and her half-sister. And Priscilla tells the author that her mother, she was concerned because the other kids were going to be there, and here was this stranger and the author puts the emphasis on the word stranger. And Priscilla continues, I think my mother talked to Jean and asked him, please don't say anything to my father. Paul Beaulieu came home shortly after Jean arrived, making the situation even more tense. When Anne introduced me to Beaulieu, meaning Paul, he left immediately, recalled Jean. I sort of felt that he was a little uptight that I had even shown up. He left the room and I didn't see him again. In fact, I don't even remember if he shook my hand. He hardly acknowledged me. He was very cool and he didn't say anything. And then Jean relates this to the author saying, well, maybe he just didn't like or thought that I just showed up unannounced and he didn't have any warning. Well, it didn't really seem like Anne gave him any kind of warning at all. It seemed like Paul came home early and didn't count on that. And then she had to just basically play duck and cover and try to figure out something to just ease all the tension that was going on. Hence the reason why she's asking Jean, basically, can you just lie that you're just a friend, but you're not a member of the family, which he was. I mean, can you even imagine what it must have been like for Jean in that situation? For him and his mother, Catherine, to know that they were just ruthlessly cut out of Anne and Priscilla's life the first time, and then to finally reconnect with Priscilla and Anne all these years later, but then to be made to feel like an inconvenient stranger when you are indeed a member of the family, you are an uncle. And I'll get into this a little bit more, but I just really, really feel for the guy. I really, really do. I'm sure his mother and Jean had thought about that over the years, that obviously Anne was receptive to a relationship with them. And after Jimmy had passed, but it seemed like once she connected with and married Paul Beaulieu, that it was just a clean break. There was no word from her at all. Catherine always suspected that it had to do with Paul. And I think we can see from the account of this tense exchange in the household that was indeed the case. What does this tell you about the dynamics that are inside the Beaulieu household? It seems like Anne is friendly and hospitable and much more able to breathe and relax with Jean. Obviously, when Paul isn't around, as soon as Paul comes back around, this toxic family dynamic of keeping secrets and keeping the status quo gets, started up again immediately. And can you just imagine what it must have been like for Jean to sit around and just pretend that he's a friend, not a family member? I mean, I cannot even imagine what he went through, but what I do want to say about it is that this is obviously a violation in Paul Beaulieu's mind. This is a threat to him, and I've talked about it in other episodes, but I just really do not get how someone can do that to a child. I mean, that is your adoptive daughter. Priscilla was a daughter that he adopted and took on the role as father and caregiver for her. But he's so threatened of the man that is Jimmy Wagner. But think about it. James Wagner is dead. He's not even someone in Paul and Anne's life that can resurface and cause any type of trouble. He's a memory, but Paul is so threatened by a memory that he's willing and was able and did it to take away that memory from Priscilla, to erase that entire part of Priscilla's life. Half of who Priscilla is was her father. I just find that so unbelievably tragic, sets the stage for the secretive nature that Priscilla herself adopts as a child. She finds out this tragic family secret at age 13. And then, as we saw in every subsequent chapter, how her secretive nature, how the way she conducted herself with friends started. Friends were noting back in Texas at the time. She was living in Texas and she finds this out. Her Texas friends at the time, where it was like in 8th grade, something happened with her. Something shifted. She was quiet. She wasn't as outgoing. She was hanging out with this rough crowd. I mean, this is all indicators of an emotional trauma response. And, she gets to Germany. She's in this atmosphere of what seems like fearful tension in the Beaulieu home. It's just all the signs are there. I'm just so perplexed thinking about why Anne and Paul Beaulieu thought this was a good course of action to take for Priscilla to keep the identity of her birth father from her for 13 years. And I've had people in my comments previously come after me and saying, well, you can't really compare the social mores of back then with now. And I'm thinking, no. Truth is truth. You can be completely honest with a child about where they came from, but make it age appropriate, right? It was always going to be an uncomfortable conversation, but it was a conversation that needed to happen because she grew up thinking that it was something wrong, that like where she came from, there was something wrong with that. I mean, that is the messaging that she's given. If you can deliver the truth about where she came from and the truth about who her father was with love, with acceptance, if Paul would have come to Priscilla at an age appropriate time and in an age appropriate conversation and had said, this is the reality, but I love you. I'm here. I'm taking that responsibility from your dad and I'm taking it upon myself in loving memory of him. And you don't have to be ashamed of who you are and where you came from. We can celebrate your dad. We can talk about your dad. It's okay. It's just, this whole thing really, really gets me fired up, you guys. But I just get so angry and incensed thinking about it, that he was so threatened, not by a man, but by a memory. It's mind-boggling to me. And the fragile ego of that man completely, and again, my opinion, sets the stage for the character development of Priscilla. I mean, what has been everyone's biggest critique of Priscilla over the years? That she's not honest, that she keeps secrets, that she's not forthcoming. There's so many accounts and narratives and interviews out there that punch holes in everything that she's said about her and Elvis over the years, that people are like, why? Well, we can see why, can't we? We can see where she came from. We can see why keeping the status quo and prioritizing secrets is more important than love and truthful acceptance and honesty. It just boggles the mind. I know I'm going on. The reason why is because so many of us are so hard on Priscilla, and like I've said, rightly so, because of all her secrecy. But this really does indicate trauma. Now, there are many that could argue, and I'm one of them, frankly, that at a certain point, though, you adjust, you assess, you see what happened to you in the past and in your childhood. You see with adult reasoning, recollection, and intelligence that it wasn't a good scenario. You adjust, you work on yourself, you work on changing your scenario. But in my opinion, it stunted her. It stunted her at that point in her development. And the way that she was taught how to deal with her true paternity, keeping that a secret, was then the way that Priscilla then learned to deal with managing the whole Elvis and Priscilla narrative. I personally think that if that hadn't been ingrained in her so hard for the first 15, 16 years of her life, being quiet, containing your emotions, keeping secrets, that it probably then wouldn't have manifested into this personality, this persona that she now inhabits. It's just a tragedy all around, in my opinion. But anyway, we got to get back into this chapter. So the atmosphere is tense. Jean is like, okay, I better get the heck out of here. I'm just being painted as a friend of the family, not who I really am. He doesn't really get a chance to talk to Priscilla, get to know her at all. So he's there at the house. He has these little gifts that he's bought for Priscilla and he's bought for her half siblings. He passes them out and then he just leaves. Of this meeting with Jean Wagner, Priscilla tells the author, "I think he brought me something," affirmed Priscilla. "I just know it was a very uncomfortable feeling and a very uncomfortable situation. And I know my mother was extremely uncomfortable. He didn't stay very long." You see what I mean? She's so used to absorbing the emotions of everyone around her and looking at her mother and seeing that as a model for a way to behave. Was there a part of Priscilla that maybe wanted to open up and find out more about her father's brother? I'm sure there was, but she observes her mother, she observes her stepfather, she observes the atmosphere of fear and tension in the household, and what do we come away with? A secretive young girl who is so calm, so cool, so collected that she seemingly has no emotion about the situation at all. It's so sad. Jean wrote his mother in Titusville, that's in Pennsylvania where Catherine Wagner's living at the time. And he broke the news that her missing granddaughter had been found, enclosing some snapshots he had taken, because he took some pictures of Anne and the kids and Priscilla during his second visit. Catherine Wagner was ecstatic. She wrote Anne a 14-page letter expressing how thrilled she was to have found her and Priscilla again, bringing her up to date. Not a word was mentioned about the 11 years she had missed of her only grandchild's life. Think about that. I mean, think about how many people in Catherine Wagner's position would just be so unbelievably angry and, just like let even a little bit of it out. Like, how could you do this? Only grandchild, but she was very, very tactful. She was very, very loving by all accounts. It's just, I just feel for her. So she writes this letter. She sent the letter in care of Paul Beaulieu at his military address in Wiesbaden. Big mistake there. And waited once more, this time for joy, with a letter or phone call from Anne and Priscilla. None ever came. Days passed, then weeks, finally months. Catherine Wagner concluded that Paul Beaulieu had gotten the letter and never passed it on to Anne or Priscilla. It was he, her woman's intuition told her, who had kept them apart all these years. Jean Wagner would barely acknowledge later how hurt he was by the slight. Jean says, I kept it hidden, my feelings. He was also at a loss to understand why Anne would excommunicate them. Maybe Anne was afraid of him, Catherine Wagner speculated. I can't fathom it. I can't solve it, so I just forget about it. And she decided to do nothing further. She always looked at it this way, she said in the 1970s. It's the way God wanted it to be. You guys, I feel like I'm going to cry. This is so sad. My heart was broken for a long, long time, but I think, well, if that's the way she wants it, that's the way it will be, meaning Anne. At least she had the photographs of Priscilla looking so like Jim, and she knew her granddaughter was alive and well and dating Elvis Presley. And then Suzanne tells us that Priscilla never knew about the letter that her grandmother Catherine had sent to her. She never knew anything about it, and she never even saw it. And the author saying whether Anne even saw that letter, she can only speculate because it's just another one of Anne Iverson Wagner Beaulieu's closely guarded secrets. How tragic is this? So essentially, Anne is in a relationship with a man who seemingly, I guess, as a condition for his care, their marriage, their life, she has to completely erase who she was before she met him, and she has to erase the existence of Priscilla's father. That to me is just a Faustian bargain in of itself. So Anne, I mean, obviously I do feel a large degree of sympathy for her living in that fearful environment, and the author hints over and over and over again, was an abusive environment. We'll get into that a little bit more. So, Anne's encountering Jean Wagner, essentially a ghost from her past, right? Then the author goes into a little bit more about Priscilla and Priscilla's relationships and how Priscilla deals with quote unquote ghosts from her past, because there is a girlfriend that Priscilla was very, very close to while she was living in Austin, Texas. And this girl was named Pam Rutherford. We talked about Pam in very early episodes where we're talking about Priscilla's elementary and middle school years. Pam Rutherford was a girlfriend that spent a lot of time with Priscilla, and they were thick as thieves. Pam Rutherford told Suzanne, the author, about how her and Priscilla would play Imagine If. And, it's actually pretty cute. They were around, 6th, 7th grade at the time. And apparently Pam was in love with Ricky Nelson and Priscilla was in love with Elvis. And they would just lie in their bed and just exchange stories back and forth. Like, imagine if we met them. Imagine if we married them. Imagine if, we had this wonderful life together. And they would just swap and exchange these little fantasies and stories about this fairy tale romance and marriage that Pam would have with Ricky and Priscilla would have with Elvis. So all very sweet, all very innocent. So Pam is telling the author that she's part of a military family too, and Priscilla and her family were sent to Wiesbaden, Germany. Pam and her family were sent to England, and Pam is still pen paling with a lot of friends that she knew and that Priscilla knows as well. And there was a girl by the name of Linda Williams that Pam and Priscilla knew. Linda is with Priscilla in Germany. Pam's connecting with Linda saying, oh, hey, I'm coming to Germany with my family on a little trip. I would love to meet with you. I would love to meet Priscilla. Pam makes these arrangements to meet with Linda Williams. They have a nice little visit. She also makes arrangements to meet with Priscilla. And Pam tells the author that when her family arrived in Germany on the day that she was supposed to be at Priscilla's house meeting up with her, that she sat and waited and she waited and she waited, but Priscilla never showed up. And Pam ended up leaving being stood up by Priscilla, and she was quite hurt about it. She hadn't seen Priscilla in going on 2 years, and I'm sure, just like everyone else, she told the author, I had seen this Life magazine pictorial about Priscilla and Elvis. I'm sure there was a huge part of Pam that wanted to have that conversation with Priscilla. Oh my gosh, our imagine if little storytelling fun game that we would play in Texas came true for you, Priscilla. You were a huge Elvis fan. You were in love with him. You wanted to marry him. And now look what happened. You were spending time with him in Germany. You're the girl he left behind. Tell me all about it. And the author is very clear on this. She says, in retrospect, Priscilla's motivation is clear. She couldn't see Pam Rutherford now, for Pam was the keeper of one of Priscilla's secrets. She knew that Priscilla was a longtime Elvis Presley fan and that she had hoped fervently for 3 years that she would one day meet Elvis, date Elvis, and marry Elvis. And it does make sense to follow along with the author's line of reasoning there. It would have been very awkward for Priscilla to meet up with Pam, especially if she wanted to maintain the narrative that, oh, I'm not a fan. I don't really care about him. I wasn't seeking him out. That would have been a really awkward conversation to have. And I'm sure Priscilla just wanted to avoid the entire thing. In my opinion, I think that she was probably in cahoots with her mother. I'm sure her mother knew that Priscilla had no intention of showing up and meeting with Pam. She was probably telling Pam, oh, hey, here's my watch. And any time now, she'll probably come running through the door. I'm sure that there was a conversation between Anne and Priscilla where Priscilla was like, I don't want to have a conversation with Pam. It's going to make me look weird if I look like I'm just so obsessed with Elvis that this is actually what ended up happening. So that's what I think happened with that whole thing, why she stood Pam up. Because Priscilla doesn't want to be seen as a conniver. She doesn't want to be seen as someone that is just mapping everything out and just trying to pull all these strings from behind the scenes. And she probably definitely doesn't want to take the chance of Pam running back to all her little friends when she gets back to England saying stuff like, oh, Priscilla, this is my friend from Texas and she was in love with Elvis Presley back in the day. And isn't this crazy? Like, she did end up meeting him and it's so wonderful. It's like, we all know why Priscilla wanted to avoid that whole exchange. So at this point in the chapter, she starts explaining a little bit more about Priscilla's social life in Germany. And she's talking about how at this point, the Beaulieus had been living in off-base housing. But now that there was some quarters that were coming up, they were able to move onto base. So she was no longer as isolated as she was back in the town. She was able to spend a lot more time with the military kids on the base. And there was a friend that she made named Debbie Ross that basically lived across the hall from the Beaulieus. And Debbie is described as being this cute little kind of blonde, bubbly teenager. And Debbie tells the author that they were very different in appearance and temperament, but Debbie surmises that she was Priscilla's physical and intellectual opposite, and because they were so different, she feels that Priscilla didn't feel threatened by her, and by all accounts, they had no competition between them, and it was a very kind of easy, amicable relationship, and they did indeed share a few confidences, but Debbie does take pains to tell the author that she didn't feel that they were super, super close. The author tells us, Debbie ate dinner with the Beaulieus, spent the night in their apartment, listened to records, and occasionally helped Priscilla with her homework. The Elvis part of Priscilla's life, Debbie recalled, was all sort of mysterious. Mary Ann Barks, another one of Priscilla's friends, who was also in Debbie Ross's clique, remembers spending the night at Priscilla's with Debbie when Elvis called. I thought, oh my gosh, Elvis is on the phone. At that time, calling the States was like calling the moon. You had to practically put a phone call in and wait a day to get the call back, and there would be crackling, and goodness knows how much it cost. You'd only call back to the States if somebody was dying or if you had to get some emergency information, and he was just calling her. I mean, that's actually really cute to hear about, this is 1960. This is definitely not the way it is now where everything is so instantaneous, but These friends of hers, Mary and Debbie, are seeing this relationship between Priscilla and Elvis, but Priscilla is still relatively tight-lipped about it, and it is a sort of mysterious thing that just seems kind of standoffish. And Debbie talks about going into Priscilla's room and seeing Elvis's combat jacket that he gave to her on his last day in Germany, and Priscilla had it nailed up on the wall in her bedroom, and it was kind of like her proclamation that Elvis gave me this and that I have a special bond with him. And Debbie and Mary were just completely basically in awe of the whole situation. Debbie tells the author it was just like she was in an untouchable category, not approachable, too pretty, too unreal, not a part of us. Debbie was Priscilla's best friend at the time, but they were not what Debbie considered close. I didn't really get involved or ask a lot of questions about her relationship with Elvis, Debbie said years later. I was interested in her as my friend, not as a way to get to anything, and maybe that's why we could be friends. Priscilla did show Debbie her treasure box, however, and lamented how difficult it was to get letters to Elvis, and that she had to send them through Joe Esposito on special pink stationery, although in later interviews, Joe told the author that he doesn't recall pink stationery being sent to Graceland. Debbie said that she did show me a few things that Elvis had sent Priscilla and given Priscilla, and a lot of them were records. And Elvis would kind of, I guess, send messages to Priscilla through the records that he was sending her. He was sending her songs and titles like Sealed with a Kiss, Hey Hey Paula, Will You Marry Me One Day? And he sent her a copy of the album Goodnight My Love, which was apparently the record that they would hear on the radio every night, right about the time that Priscilla would have to leave to go home. So he's sending her these reminders, so to speak, of their time together in Germany. And Debbie even recalls Priscilla and Debbie going back to Debbie's house because apparently Debbie had a better record player than the Beaulieus had, and she had accidentally scratched one of the records that Elvis had given to Priscilla, and that Priscilla was extremely, extremely upset about the situation. Debbie basically said that she felt that Priscilla had a love for Elvis, but even beyond a feeling of romantic love, she said more than anything, she felt like when Priscilla would talk about Elvis, it was almost as if it was from a place of security, like she had some type of special understanding or security for her future. Personally, I think that Priscilla was so tight-lipped with her little girlfriends at the time about her relationship with Elvis because she was getting coaching from her mother, I'm sure. You know, this is who she learned to be the keeper of secrets from. So I'm sure, in my opinion, that Anne basically said to Priscilla, just don't talk about Elvis. Be tight-lipped about it. We have to be smart about this. We need to not spout off at the mouth about everything that's going on, about his feelings for you, your feelings for him. Let's just keep quiet about it, because I'm sure that she didn't want Priscilla going around talking about all kinds of stuff. She didn't want word getting out about the nature of their relationship, how serious that they were in their feelings for one another, because it was still, as the author tells us, it was considered taboo back then. And the author tells us that, you know, there were several of Priscilla's girlfriends, their parents didn't even like them hanging out with Priscilla because they didn't like the idea of her in a relationship with Elvis, who was 10 years older than her. And one of them even said that any high school girl that dated a military guy, she was considered trash. So I'm sure Anne couldn't take the possibility of anything getting out about Priscilla. So that's basically why she told her to keep mum about the whole thing. Around this time, Priscilla made another girlfriend, an 8th grade girl by the name of Ronnie Garland. And Ronnie lived below Priscilla in base housing, and she said that they would often co-babysit their respective siblings with each other, and they would share confidences. And Priscilla would talk to Ronnie about her relationship with Tom Stewart. Ronnie characterized the relationship that Priscilla had with Tom as being very, very serious. And Ronnie told the author she was drawn not to your clean-cut all-American. She was drawn to the bad ones. I would have been scared to death with Tom. Like Al, Al Corey, a friend of Priscilla's that she dated a little bit, but he was also a confidant as well. She says, like Al, she perceived Priscilla's relationship with Tom as a sneak around thing, with Priscilla meeting him down the street or pretending to go to a girlfriend's house so that her parents would not find out, for her father did not approve. Priscilla's father, Ronnie, and her parents observed, had a double standard. I remember my dad kept saying he seemed so strict and had so many rules, but then to go let her at such an early age be alone with Elvis Presley. The author offers a little interesting twist here. Listen to this. She says, Paul Beaulieu's reputation for keeping a tight rein on Priscilla due to his behavior was after Elvis left Germany, when he tried very hard to prevent Priscilla from dating anyone but Elvis. He was promoting this from the very beginning, declared Ronnie, who remembered Priscilla's father coming to the house for parties, showing off photographs of Priscilla with Elvis, which, he said, were taken the night they met at a small reception the Beaulieus attended in his version. We know that's not true. Her parents were not there the night that Cary Grant and his wife Carol drove Priscilla to meet Elvis in Bad Nauheim. And Ronnie goes on to say that Paul Beaulieu was very, very proud of these photos. And I talked about this in the last episode about how reading all these accounts, it really seemed to me, anyway, maybe to you as well, that Paul and Anne Beaulieu were actually more infatuated with the fact that Priscilla was involved in a little romantic relationship with Elvis while he was in Germany. They seemed like the infatuated groupies way more than Priscilla did. That's just my opinion. And apparently, according to the author at this point in the chapter, she's talking about one of Anne Beaulieu's Connecticut cousins, a gal that she was close to when she was younger and was around during the time when Anne was sneaking out to meet Jimmy Wagner. You know, she was around there for the whole courtship, the marriage, the early stages, all of it. Her name is Margaret, and Margaret was saying that in the time spent with Paul Beaulieu, she also observed that. She also observed that Paul Beaulieu seemed very, very taken with the idea that Priscilla had been involved with Elvis, and that he perceived Elvis as being this wonderful, charismatic, very rich person, and that he was very, very excited with the idea of having an association with all of Elvis's magnetism, and that he really, really enjoyed Priscilla's connection to Elvis. So Ronnie Garland, Priscilla's little 8th grade friend who lives below her, goes into even more detail. And she has quite a bit to say about the dynamics of the Beaulieu household. She lived underneath, in an apartment underneath them, for about 3 years. And the chapter says, Paul Beaulieu especially disturbed her. I was never comfortable around him, she admitted. Priscilla, Ronnie said, was afraid of him. That was real evident. She was absolutely panicked. And she goes on to say, I just know what you sense as a person. She was definitely afraid of him. She'd have to babysit a lot, and that was usually when she would ask me up and we'd talk. She'd say little things. And then she also tells the author that her own father had kind of like a weird foreboding about Paul Beaulieu as well, and that he would mention to his daughter Ronnie that, you know, he was strange. And she kind of remembers them drinking a lot in the Beaulieu household, and that she commented that Anne was a very, very pretty lady, and she says that he was not a good-looking man. Ronnie noticed the unusually tight bond between Scylla and her mother. Priscilla worshipped Anne, and Anne, Ronnie felt, genuinely wanted the best for Priscilla. Priscilla told me about her mother. She loved her mother. I liked Anne, but her mother was quiet. I really think she was afraid of Paul Beaulieu, too. Ronnie's little sister and Priscilla's younger sister, Michelle, were also best friends and were about the same age, so the younger two girls spent much time together, often spending the night at one another's houses. Anne had a black eye one time, recalled Ronnie, and Michelle told my little sister, my daddy hits my mommy. Ronnie didn't know whether to believe Michelle, since the girls were just little twerps of 7 or so, but the child's story was consistent with Ronnie's intuitive discomfort around Priscilla's father. Again, going back to what I've talked about time and time and time again, this atmosphere of secrets, this atmosphere of keeping your emotions in check, keeping the status quo, you know, drinking, all this kind of stuff. There's a lot of ego going on. You know, drinking and alcoholism is rampant in military families. It seemed like there was a lot of drinking going on here. And it seems like, to me, Anne was participating in quite a bit of it, probably to dull her senses of being in this fearful marriage like that. But, you know, it's just all very, very sad. It just seems like this whole tense dark family atmosphere. You've got Priscilla's half-siblings not really even knowing the truth about Priscilla's birth father, as if it's something that Priscilla needs to be ashamed about. But, and anyway, it's like the author's just suggesting that, is this the way that Priscilla and Anne were living? It seems so, living in fear. And she's asking, was there abuse? Was there some type of abuse? Especially when you hear the story from Ronnie's little sister saying that Priscilla's little sister, Michelle, is telling her, oh, my daddy hits my mommy. And hearing this, I really do feel for Priscilla, and I feel for her siblings, and I do feel for Anne if this was indeed the case, if these accounts are true of what it was like to grow up in Priscilla's home when she was a child. And Ronnie continues to the author saying, at the time, all I knew was that he, meaning Paul Beaulieu, was creepy, and I didn't like being around him, Ronnie remembered. I really think that that was what my daddy was trying to tell me about this man, that there was something wrong with this guy, Ronnie. Priscilla really held her emotions in check. She was always in command of everything. Now, this is Ronnie talking, the one that lived under Priscilla for 3 years. If she was hurting or upset, you were never totally aware of it, not by words anyway. If there was abuse in the Beaulieu house, confirmation of its existence would never come from Priscilla's lips. When Priscilla did speak of Paul Beaulieu once she was famous, she lionized him, writing in her memoir of my, quote, strong, handsome father who was the center of our world, end quote, gushing to interviewers about how wonderful he was. Classic compensating, right? Compensating behavior for someone who had been abused. That's what the author's asserting. Or as Shakespeare wrote in Hamlet, the lady doth protest too much, methinks. And the author interjects at this point in the chapter a little sidebar talking about Mike Stone. Now, Mike Stone is the man that Priscilla cheated on Elvis with, that karate instructor, and she eventually did leave Elvis for Mike Stone. They lived together for a period of time. And Mike Stone's telling the author that Priscilla was always very, very tight-lipped about her childhood, even when she was with him, that he would share confidences with her about his childhood in an effort to get closer to Priscilla, but he never felt like that was reciprocated. He never felt that she really opened up to him about anything that she experienced growing up. And even Mike is saying it was always just this air of mystery. It just wasn't discussed. And what have we been seeing over and over and over in so many of these interviews, even back in the day when Priscilla's 14, 15 years old, is that these girlfriends of hers, she's nice enough and she's pleasant enough and they talk and they spend time together, but there's always this facade, this wall that is separating Priscilla from them, and they never felt like they really got to know her. There was always this air of distance, this air of mystery, and just indicative of her home life, right? And tragically, in my opinion, just indicative of this tense, fearful atmosphere that Priscilla grew up in. You just keep your mouth shut and you don't talk and you keep your emotions in check. And Ronnie even tells the author that it was this whole secretive nature of Priscilla, and especially in regards to Elvis, that what little she did glean, she did, going back to that idea of security, she got that idea that she was excited about Elvis because it seemed to be that he was a lifeline for her away from this tense atmosphere that she was experiencing at home. And Ronnie says, being as pretty as she was, you'd think with the rest of us looking at her in envy, well, what more could she want, you know? But she never seemed all that happy to me. So it didn't seem like Priscilla had all that happy of a childhood. Does it to you? So what do you guys think about everything that we've talked about in this chapter? What do you think about Paul Beaulieu? Do you see him the way I see him, as this looming authoritative figure that just rules with this iron fist, and this atmosphere is just being bred in his house of just fear, of submissiveness? You know, there's no laughter, there's no honesty, there's no fun, just all very sad. But one thing that I was thinking of when I was thinking of Paul was I can't really seem to reconcile this duality that it seems of his personality, because on this one hand, he seems to be the authority figure in charge of a really tense and sad household, but then at the same time, he just seems so enamored of the whole Elvis-Priscilla relationship and just seems so permissive and so just accepting of the fact that he's more than willing to let his daughter hang out out with Elvis, who's 10 years older than her. It really seems to me that he was very enamored of Elvis's whole persona. I've told you what I believe about the dynamics of Priscilla and Elvis's relationship, about were they intimate, were they not intimate, and all that. But how is Paul Beaulieu supposed to be expected to know that? How is Anne supposed to be expected to know that? Well, I'm sure Priscilla told Anne a lot more than she told Paul. But point being, I mean, what parents are going to permit a 14-year-old girl on school nights and school night after school night to go hang out with him? And the only thing I could come up with is that they were enamored of the situation and caught up in the Elvis of it all, so to speak, right? His fame. And it seemed like he wanted his daughter in the thick of all of that. So let me know what you guys thought about this chapter. The next chapter, chapter 17, is going to be called Baby Doll. And in Baby Doll, we're going to examine even more of the relationships that Priscilla allegedly had with boys other than Tom Stewart in Germany after Elvis left. I can't wait to join you on that one. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I do so appreciate you. Like the video, share the video. If you're watching on a mobile phone and underneath the video you see a hype button, can you hit the hype button for me? It helps so much in getting the video out there to more people who may not have seen my child bride playlist. But again, if you haven't started from the beginning, go do yourself a favor. Go check out the playlist from the first episode, because you guys know how I love to offer my commentary and dissect all of this, and I really get into the weeds about Priscilla's origin story from the beginning. So I can't wait to see you guys for episode 17. Again, thank you so much for spending this time, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.